Welcome back to Walking Through the Word. Today we're going to be looking at 1 Timothy chapter 5 verse 1 through 16. So if you have your Bibles, open them up with me as we walk through the Word together. Paul now transitions into giving Timothy some pastoral approaches on how to care for particular age groups and particular situations, social situations in the church. This is just practical pastoral elements that Paul is giving to Timothy, because remember in the previous study that he tells him that he should set the example. He should be the one living righteously, so that way he can show the church that he's growing in his position. So Paul is just ensuring that Timothy applies some practical elements to his pastoral leadership, especially when dealing with the elderly in his congregation. So the first thing that Paul notes here is he says, don't rebuke, and the word rebuke here is epilexes. That means to sharply correct. So don't sharply correct. That doesn't mean that Timothy shouldn't be correcting people who are in sin, or that you shouldn't be calling people out who are doing things inappropriately or against the will of God. But rather, again, because of Timothy's age, he should be approaching certain contextual situations in the context of his ministry with certain pastoral elements. So when it comes to older men, he says, don't rebuke, sharply rebuke an older man. And it is interesting that the word older man here is presbytero, same word where we get presbyter or leader, but in this context, it's not talking about a leader of the church. Paul's not saying to Timothy in this particular text that he should not be rebuking his leaders or his elders, his overseers of his church. But rather, when he comes to approach an older man, a man in his elder age, that he should not be doing it sharply. He should not be rebuking him with sharpness in his tone. He says, but, because this word but here is the contrast of this, but exhort him as a father. So there is a pastoral way in which you can approach certain age groups in the church with pastoral sentiment, with pastoral wisdom. If there is an older gentleman in your congregation, pastor, and this is just true for all of us who are in pastoral ministries, if there's an older gentleman in your church and maybe he's, not interacting with the congregation well, or maybe he's causing strife or division in the congregation, it's just appropriate to approach him with respect because he is an elder gentleman, and to exhort him as a father and not rebuke him as a peer. So show them the correct honor and the correct exhortation for their age. Doesn't mean you shouldn't rebuke them. Just ensure that you do it appropriately. And we know that this is not in reference to an elder or overseer. So the word presbytero is not in reference to an elder or an overseer of the church, but an older man in terms of age, because Paul, in this context, in these next two verses, is going to be talking about age groups. So just like he shouldn't sharply rebuke an older man, but to exhort him as a father because of his age, he says then younger men as brothers. So the older men, Timothy, if you have to correct them as fathers. The younger men, the ones who are younger than you, correct them as little brothers. Correct them as you would a little brother in your own household. Then he says older women, and this is why I don't think it's in reference to the elder here, because he uses the same word just in the feminine He says presbyteros. So over here you have presbytero for the older men, and then presbyteros for the women. So this is not in context of the elder or the overseer of the church, but just of age groups. So older women as mothers, and you should be honoring the old men and the old women as fellow households of your family, household members. He says, and the younger women as sisters with all purity. So the rebuking here should be done with all purity to fathers, brothers, mothers, sisters. This is the family of God. We are all part of this family of God. And Paul's just giving some practical insights. He's saying this is how you deal with the family of God. If you're going to be dealing with an older gentleman in your congregation, you have to rebuke him. Do it like a father. If you have to do it for a younger brother, do it as a brother. If you had to do it for an older woman in your church, treat her like it's your own mother. And if it's a younger woman, treat her as your own sister. This is good, practical, pastoral advice to Timothy from Paul. As a pastor, Timothy, or you, pastor, who's listening to this right now, treat your family members in correction as if it were your own family, your own brother, sister, mother, father, daughter. Treat them as your own. Paul then transitions into the support of the widow and gives just some practical advice on the registering of widows. So it was a common practice in the early church, especially in the very young inception of the church. We can see this in the book of Acts. In Acts chapter 6, we see the widows and we see those who are asking for help, financial help. And the registration of widows required a certain particular set of practical elements to it. And Paul wants Timothy to ensure that if he's going to register a widow, somebody who has lost their husband, into the support of the church, that they should meet certain criteria. So he says, support widows who are genuinely in need. And so for the next several verses, this is what he's going to be focusing on. What does it mean to be genuinely in need? So every aspect of the next set of verses that we're going to go through is going to identify the genuineness of their need. He says, but if any, so in contrast to anyone who is not genuinely in need, but if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them, this is not talking about the widow, this is talking about the children and the grandchildren. Let the children and the grandchildren learn to practice godliness toward their own family first. Now, this is very important. One of the 10 commandments is honor your father and your mother, because it will go well with you in the land if you do so. And the term honor here usually is referring to support, take care of in their elderly age. So one of the first elements of a true widow is that if a widow doesn't have children or grandchildren, then they should be considered for the register of the widows. So if a woman has been married, let's say for 30 years, and maybe she had 2 children, but her 2 children died, and now her husband's dead, and now she doesn't have any support for herself, then that widow should be considered for support. But if they have children and grandchildren, then those children and grandchildren should learn to practice godliness. That godliness is the godliness of supporting their own mother or matriarch. So if they're taking care of their mother, of the widow, of the matriarch of the family, that's godly of them to do that. It's godly of them to ensure that they're taking care of their own mother and grandmother. That's what he says, and to repay their parents, for this pleases God. So the repaying here is the supporting of the matriarch of the family. That's so important. That's so important as a genuine pastoral approach to how the church should support their widows in the church. So if there's widows in your own church and you see that her children are in that church, but now that the widow has lost her husband, you can go to the children and say, you should be supporting your mother. You should be supporting your grandmother. She gave years of life to serve you and take care of you. Now it's your turn to take care of her. Honor your father, your mother. Take care of them, support them in their elderly age. Then he says again, the widow who is truly in need, again, now that we've kind of transitioned from saying this is what it means to be truly in need. If you don't have children or grandchildren that can take care of you, then you're truly in need. Because that's why it says, and left alone. So no family, no children. So no family, no children left behind to be able to take care of you in your elderly age. This one is truly in need, and she's left alone. She has put her hope in God. And the hope here in God is specifically the aid of the church. It's not just some arbitrary, like, yeah, I have faith that God will take care of me. No, the one who's truly in need, she's putting her hope in God, and God has given the church. So the aid of the church is the hope that God has for her when she's truly left alone. Because he says, and continues night and day in her petitions and prayers. Again, these petitions and prayers on reference to the church. A good godly widow who's lost her husband is going to be serving in the church day and night, is going to be petitioning and asking God and praying to God and saying, Lord, please take care of me. My hope is in you. So that's someone who's truly in need. But then Paul gives a warning. He says, however, she, the widow, who is self-indulgent, is dead even while she lives. This self-indulgence is just someone who is constantly asking for things, is constantly asking the church for aid, but is not putting her hope in God, is not continuing day and night in prayers and petitions. She's selfish. She's self-indulgent. She only wants to be fed or taken care of without having to put work in the church or to put petitions and prayers into the church, or she's only thinking about herself. So even though she is alive, she's living, if she's self-indulgent, she's actually dead spiritually. The deadness is in her heart. So she's dead even while she lives. Paul's warning, you're going to have these kinds of people in your church. And if you find these kinds of people, he's already told them, make sure that you rebuke them as a elderly woman, as a mother. Correct them. He says, command this. So make sure that you command the church to do this also, so that they will be above reproach. And the commanding here is the command to the self-indulgent woman. He says, command them not to be self-indulgent. Command them to be like the godly widow who petitions and prays day and night. He says, but if anyone does not provide for his own family, and the provision here is not just talking about husbands or fathers. It's not talking about that specifically. It's in the context of the widow, remember. Context of the matriarch. So the anyone here can't be talking about the husband because the husband's dead in this context. Now, it is true that if you're hearing this and you're a husband of your own family, you should be taking care of your own household. It's required of you. If you don't, you're worse than an unbeliever. But if anyone here in the context of this is the children and the grandchildren, they should be the ones taking care of their own family. That is the widow, the matriarch of the family, especially for his own household. If there's a son that's going to the church and their father has died and now the mother's left alone, that son should take care of that mother in her elderly age. And if he doesn't take care of his own mother in his own household, Paul says he has denied the faith. He's an unbeliever. He's not really a Christian. This is not the conduct of a true Christian. They will obey the context of the verse, honor your father and your mother. So he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. And that is just the case. And this is really important for Timothy to understand, that you don't just register any widow. You use wisdom when registering. And you actually put the responsibility on the family members rather than just purely on the church. He says no widow is to be enrolled on the list for support. So the enrollment here is for the support. This is aid. This is financial aid. This is food. This is help. No widow is to be enrolled on the list for support unless, this is very important, here's one of the reasons why, unless she is at least 60 years old. 60. That's pretty old. Even for today, it's pretty old. And even for Paul's time, that's pretty old. She has to be at least 60 years old. So that means that if there was a woman who was under the age of 60, the probability of her getting remarried or finding a husband again was actually pretty significantly high. Doesn't mean that it was guaranteed. But she had to be at least 60 years old, which means she had to be past the point of bearing children or not being remarried again. She was past any opportunity of having children again. So if she's past that age, if she's past the point where she cannot have a family anymore to take care of her, then she has to be at least 60 years old. Has been the wife of one husband. One husband. So she can't have multiple divorces. She can't have 5, 6 husbands. And is well known for good works. So you're not just registering people on a whim just because they've lost a husband, so you have to have pity on them. You have to use wisdom and discretion when registering an elderly person into the list of the widows for aid and support. And the good works here is he's going to highlight, that is, if she has brought up children, shown hospitality, washed the saints' feet, which means to serve in the church, helped the afflicted, devoted herself to every good work. You can know the kind of woman that she is based upon her years of service to the church. If she did have children, but they're nowhere around, or they've disowned her because she's a believer, or maybe they don't live in the area and she's all left alone, you can enroll them. As she opened up her home and had meals with people in her own house, you can enroll her. Has she served the people by washing the saints' feet? Have you seen her serve tables? Have you seen her care for people and love people? Have you seen her help the afflicted, people in the hospitals, people in the sick bed? Have you seen her praying for individuals? have you seen her devoted to every good work in service to the kingdom of God? You can enroll that one. And then he gives a contrast. But here's the kind of person you don't enroll. Refuse to enroll younger widows. Why? Because they can be remarried. They can find a husband again. Not only that, they have strength and vigor, so they can work. So Paul says, refuse the younger widow, because for when they, the younger widows, when they are drawn away from Christ by desire, they want to marry again. He says, I've seen this far too often. We register a young woman into the church. She says, I'm going to dedicate myself to serving the church. This is part of the requirement, is that a widow just be only serving in the church, petitioning day and night in the church with prayers and petitions and caring for the saints and opening up her home and caring for people. But a young woman, maybe in their mid 30s, late 40s even, she may desire to be married again. So don't enroll a younger widow. Especially if she has children, they can take care of her. So she'll be drawn away by desire, they want to marry again, and will therefore receive condemnation. And the condemnation here is not condemnation to hell, but it's just a social stigma. A condemnation of social propriety. Like, hey, what happened? You were going to serve the Lord, and now you're being drawn away to marriage? You gave a pledge to the church, you gave a pledge to serving in the church, and now you're removing your pledge to the church because you want to be married? So it's not a condemnation to hell as if like they're going to be sent to hell, or that they're cut off from Christ or something like that, but rather because the condemnation here, because they have renounced their original pledge. Because the idea of a woman being enrolled into the registry of the church is that she would then dedicate her life to the church, because the church will then take care of her. The church will pay for her, the church will feed her and clothe her and house her. But if they're young and they get drawn away in marriage, then they have to renounce their pledge to the Lord. They're like, well, I guess I fell in love after all, and I'm not going to serve in the church anymore. I'm going to go be with my husband. Well, now you've backtracked on a pledge that you once made to the Lord. He says at the same time, these younger widows, they also learn to be idle. So an older woman who doesn't get around very easily, maybe has a hard time walking long distances, or doesn't have the strength that a young woman has, they usually take their time. They actually find ways to occupy their time because things might take them a little bit longer to do because of their age. But a younger woman, they just become idle. They become lazy. They become dormant. They don't do anything. And what ends up happening is because they're being taken care of, they go from house to house. They just go around to the community. They just go visit people. They are not only idle, he says, but are also gossips and busybodies, saying things they shouldn't. So these younger widows become idle, and they just become problems to the church. They go around house to house, talking with people, being in people's business, getting involved in people's lives, trying to spread rumors or just gossiping with people. Just be like, oh, did you see sister so and so, and this is what happened? Because they're being taken care of. They don't have to work. They may be even drawn away by marriage, and yet here they are house to house talking with people, getting in trouble with their words and with their conversations, and just being a busybody. Just aimless and pointless and not working and lazy, but all of a sudden they're causing problems because all they want to do is talk. So Paul says, refuse the younger widows. This is probably a problem that Paul saw over and over again. He's like, you know what? We're just not going to register younger widows. So make sure they're at least 60 years old. He says, therefore, in light of this, in light of all the things that I've witnessed as his experience, pastoral experience, I've already witnessed in the church, he says, therefore, I want younger women to marry. And younger women here specifically is in the context of the widow. So if you were a younger woman and you were married and then your husband dies and you're still a younger woman, just marry. It's actually better for you to be married. It occupies your time. You're no longer idle. I want younger women to marry. Have children. This will definitely occupy your time. You won't be idle. You won't be so worried about going house to house and being a busybody. When you're pregnant and you're having children, you have to raise children. It gives you a purpose. It gives you an aim. So if your husband dies, it's actually better for you to remarry. He says, I want them to have children and manage their household and give the adversary no opportunity to accuse us. So the reason he wants younger married to marry is because it gives them purpose. It gives them an aim. It gives them things to do. It doesn't keep them idle. It gives them children to raise, a home to manage, and therefore by doing so, it won't give the adversary, the devil, any opportunity to accuse the church. And the opportunity to accuse here is in talking about gossips. Gossips is one of the number one things that destroys churches today. We think it's about adultery, and we think it's about alcohol or drugs, but usually it's gossips, people talking about other people in the church and causing division and strife and chaos in the lives of other people. He says, for some of these widows, these young women, have already turned away to follow Satan, the adversary. And the following here, of course, is the gossips. They're doing it right now. They're gossiping right now. And Paul's saying they've turned away to Satan. So he says, if any believing woman, is a Christian, has widows in her family, let her help them. And let the church not be burdened, so that it can help widows in genuine need. So notice it puts it right back onto the family members. And it removes the burden from the church. Let the church not be burdened. If there truly are widows amongst your congregation, you should care for them genuinely. You should love them genuinely. But remember, Paul gives us practical advice on how to care for these elderly in our church, how to care for women who have lost their husband. So go, take the wisdom of Paul, apply it to your church context, and may the Lord be with you. Until next time on Walking Through the Word.